Hello, and welcome to Leaderfolk, an inclusive look inside the Jewish community. I'm your host, Sarah Bogomolny, and today I'm pleased to welcome our guest, Samantha Vinokor-Meinrath. She's the Associate Director of Adolescent Initiatives for the Jewish Education Center of Cleveland, and she is finishing up her doctorate in Jewish education at Gratz College. We are so glad to have us with her today. Welcome, Samantha.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. So we are very committed to representing a wide swath of Jewish experience in the guests that we welcome onto our podcast. And so just to kind of contextualize us, I would love if you could talk about your personal relationship to Judaism and how that led you into your path now as a Jewish educator.
Sure. I think on some level, I was setting up for a path as a Jewish educator my whole life. I grew up in New York, and my family was very involved in our conservative synagogue. I was a Hebrew school kid from a young age, got involved in the youth group, involved in volunteering within the synagogue, and always felt that I had a really deep connection with Judaism from a family perspective, whether it was through Shabbat dinners or attending services. And then also on a personal level, I found that I was excited about the content and therefore I was good at it as much as one could be good at being Jewish. And Jewish environments really were a place where I felt like I could thrive and I could shine. So I got very involved with USY. I got involved with the pro-Israel community, both in high school and then in college. And as an undergrad, started to realize that, this is actually a career path. One can be a Jewish communal professional in all sorts of different iterations. It's not just being a member of the clergy or a Hebrew school teacher, but there are all these different avenues and paths within this community that I loved so much and that had given me so much. And that's what I ultimately decided to do from my first job out of college until now. I've always been a Jewish communal professional, pivoted pretty quickly to specifically being a Jewish educator. And I think that my personal and professional journeys have really been intertwined and gone hand in hand, that as I've grown as an educator, I have therefore pivoted in my own personal Jewish practice to reflect, and then also vice versa.
Can you expand on what you mean in terms of pivoting within your own practice?
I think that my own practice has really shifted from I am a yes person and I am a rule follower. So everything that we did growing up, that my parents did, my understanding was like that's what one is supposed to do, both Jewishly and otherwise. And I met and married my Israeli husband we got married about 4 years ago, have been together about 7 years, and I was living in Israel when we met. So certain things that like just our path has become different from the way that I grew up. Right now, as we're recording, it's Passover, for example. So when I was growing up, we, never would have eaten kitniot, the legumes and kind of things on Passover that Ashkenazi Jews traditionally don't eat, but that Israelis do. And this is the first year, thanks to the coronavirus, that I'm actually celebrating Passover within my own house and not either with my parents or with my in-laws or, going somewhere else. And we've been creating our own traditions. So my husband came to me and asked, is it okay if we do the kitniot thing, or if we make our own tradition in this way, or if our Passover Seder involves something new? And we've been able to merge and blend those different things. And I think that being an educator and spending so much time working with individual learners and helping them figure out their own Jewish paths and trajectories, and that instead of thinking there's one thing that we're supposed to do, that there's this whole plethora of avenues within Judaism. By modeling that for my learners, I'm now learning how to practice what I preach and to think to myself also, how can I look at something that for me might seem a given on some level, and then adapt it to make sense in my current reality and with my family.
What are some of your favorite ways to kind of model that or bring that out within your learners? That ability to look at Jewish tradition and take ownership of it, or to personalize it, or to find a unique personal connection within the traditions that you're evaluating?
That's such a great question. I think one of my favorite things to do is to take some aspect of daily life. So something in the rhythm of our routines, whether it's how we mark the passage of time or how we take care of our bodies or how we deal with interpersonal relationships, something that on the surface doesn't have to be Jewish in any way. You could approach it from any number of traditions or non-traditions, and then to explore, what does Judaism have to say about it, and what do our instincts tell us about it? So when we think now, again, in the time of coronavirus, about the passage of time, I don't know about anyone else, but I have no idea what day of the week it is when I wake up anymore. I have lost almost all of my routines when it comes to which meetings I'm going to in the morning. Usually I know that Wednesday I'm at this location, or that, my gardener comes on Tuesdays, or whatever it might be. And all of that has gone into the ether. So instead, to look with my learners to say, all right, we know that we crave some kind of marking of time, whether it's why we get excited at the start of a new school year to have new binders and it somehow increases our productivity, or there's a phenomenon where we say at the beginning of a month, like you're more likely to start and set new goals, as opposed to like on the random 16th of a month you said, I'm going to start going to the gym every day. There's actually a phenomenon where if you start something on the first or at the beginning of a new stage, you're more likely to stick with it. And then to look at that Jewishly, how do Jews mark the passage of time, whether it's through lighting candles for Shabbat or Havdalah, and marking holidays, whether it's through something like Rosh Chodesh and marking the start of each new month, whether it's a time period like we're in now in terms of counting the Omer and how we have these seasons of intentionality for different things, and then working with my learners to think about, so how can I adapt this? How can I apply it? And maybe I've never heard of something like counting the Omer, and I don't really know what that means for me or what value that would bring. But when we put it through this language of like Jewish wisdom and Jewish tradition has this time period of self-reflection for you and for the community that you're part of, and then we can kind of meld these ancient traditions and make them newly meaningful in the context that the learners are living in right now.
I find it so interesting to think about the history of our Judaism and the texts that inform us, and then how our communities now have certainly been embarking on this process of personalization for thousands of years. And so there becomes like a societal element in addition that is completely parallel to the texts and things, but is its own sort of force, which is one of the themes that inspired us to want to do this podcast in the first place, is to recognize, this breadth of interpretation within the Jewish world, and then how that impacts the people who are trying to lead our community. So one topic that I believe is important to you is this issue of body image in the Jewish community. And I would love if you could maybe talk about this issue as much as you can in relationship to those elements, the history, the text, the way that it is viewed by the community now. What kind of inspires you on that topic?
Sure. I mean, I think that in Judaism, our relationship with our physical bodies and what they are, quote unquote, supposed to look like or do or offer really goes back to our original core texts. We hear with the patriarchs and the matriarchs that, Jacob fell in love with Rachel, because she was beautiful. And yes, we have amazing stories and midrashim about her also being a good person and like great with all of that. But ultimately, we have this idea of beauty as what drew him to her. We have, when it comes to punishments and curses, this whole idea of leprosy, of a physical ailment that then comes up later on and strikes people down, is that our bodies somehow demonstrate who we are inside and outside, and that's baked into Jewish tradition and into the world. We know, right or wrong, whether or not we like it, people are judged on some level by their bodies and by their physical appearances. And I think in the Jewish community, we're no different than anyone else in that regard, no better, no worse. But I think there are certain elements in how Judaism is practiced that contribute to kind of issues of body and body image. I mainly work with high school students, with Jewish teens. And we know that there's a crisis going on, a rise in mental health issues with high school students, but particularly with female identifying teens and adolescents. And a lot of that does relate back to their bodies. I'm sure that anyone who thinks back to their high school years doesn't go, and say, wow, that was my peak confidence. I just felt great. I loved everything about myself. It's this time when a lot of us can be in conflict with our bodies and with what's going on within us and how we feel about ourselves. And as the Jewish community, I think there's so much more that we can do to be mindful of what individuals, again, of all ages, but particularly younger individuals and women might be going through in relation to their bodies.
How do you see this come out in your work? Do you find that students are able to have open conversations about this if the topic is set out for them? How do you approach it?
I think it's really a matter of subtlety and of leaders realizing things that the same way we, try to make our spaces inclusive in other ways, whether it's for individuals with different abilities or individuals of different ages or people who might belong to different faith traditions. We take so many behind the scenes steps to be mindful of making sure that we don't wait until somebody feels uncomfortable in a space to adapt it, but to really be proactive in making sure anyone can walk into different Jewish spaces and feel welcomed and safe and loved and accepted and included. And I think this needs to be the next step in that. A couple of examples that come to mind, when I spoke earlier about marking Jewish time, I think that the ultimate way, especially again when you're working with Jewish teens or Jewish young adults, that we mark the end of an experience, whether it's a season of camp or a teen tour or a Shabbaton or a leadership convention, whatever it is that we're doing, is we have t-shirts. And anyone who spends a lot of time in the organized Jewish community, I'm sure could make a t-shirt quilt of all of these commemorative swag items that they were given with everyone's name on the back and a group inside joke, and they're lovely and it's so much fun. And I have a closet at my parents' house that I can, go to and remember everything from my USY trip to Israel or going on wheels, all these different experiences. But so not saying we should do away with that by any means, but saying that we could take these little steps to, rather than putting everyone on the spot to announce to a whole group of people, what's your t-shirt size? Something as simple as having that on a registration form. Great. Do it behind the scenes. Make sure that you're not in an environment where a staff member is asking everyone really loudly, just what size shirt do you want? And have a student who might need an extra large but not want to say that out loud because everyone else is yelling medium. to make sure that we don't put them in a position to feel embarrassed by that. Thinking about, when it comes to how we deal with food. Jews have a really interesting relationship with food, and so many people, in the best way, the way that we connect with our Judaism is through our stomachs. When people get excited to talk about, what they reminisce about Jewishly, it's about a mother's cooking or a grandmother's cooking or what they had on a birthright stop in Israel. So many of the ways that I like to do Judaism are through feeding other people, through opening my home and hosting Shabbat dinners for friends, for community members, for strangers who somehow I've been connected with and want to be in community with. Our instinct is to have this abundance of food, which is absolutely amazing and so yummy. But then when we think about this expectation, again, in terms of bodies and body image, that we have this inherent contradiction where we're pushing more and more food on people always, but then there's like this societal norm where, should I be on a diet? Should I be, watching? I shouldn't take seconds. But at the same time, all of this food is there. So really just thinking about what are the ways that we as individuals, as educators, as organizations, as institutions, as just people inviting others over can think about what we're doing to make that space welcome and inclusive to someone who might be having body image issues the same way as we would anyone else who's having any kind of struggles.
Do you think that as you are working to kind of move this conversation forward to make sure that the spaces are becoming increasingly inclusive, do you feel like you're part of a new generation of people willing to have this conversation? Do you feel like the community and the community leaders are with you on this?
I don't think there's anyone who's against it. I can't think of a single person who I have ever, met or worked with who would say that I have a problem with wanting to be mindful about body image, or that, I don't want to be supportive of this. I do think there's a generational shift when it comes to actively, though, naming this as an issue and as something to be noted and dealt with. I think we have a generation of, say, my grandparents who were, my maternal grandmother in particular was a child during the Holocaust era, and her family escaped Hitler and came to the United States. I feel like there's still a generational sense of, at some point, I didn't have enough food, clear your plate, clear your plate, keep eating. There's really like that inherent, ingrained lack of food security that has led to a whole host of generational issues with food. Then I think we have the following generation, so like the boomers, so to speak, who, without stereotyping perhaps, would keep a lot of this more inside, that maybe you're on a diet, maybe you're not. It's really nobody else's business. This is something that we deal with within our own homes, our own spaces, and it doesn't need to be necessarily on the communal agenda to think about body image. And then I'm coming at this as a millennial where and my students are Generation Z. We're living our lives a lot more openly, a lot more externally. And I think particularly when we look at these younger generations, it's all that much more important to model things that in previous generations might have been behind closed doors or known but not said. I think it's super important for me to be open with my students and to talk about struggles that we might be having, and to know that I'm a safe space, our organization is a safe space, and that we're welcoming their full selves, whether or not they would ever see body image issues as having anything to do with their Judaism. I'm not just dealing with the Jewish aspects of their lives, I'm thinking Jewishly about these multifaceted, intersectional, full people that I'm working with. So I think that all of the generations, if they see it as a problem, we all want to fix a problem and want to be kind and to be, supportive of whomever in our community is in need at any given moment. But I do think proactively bringing this up and being bold in saying so is a generational shift.
I love that idea about thinking Jewishly about a full person. I think that's beautiful, and I think it's so necessary, and it makes a Jewish education so much more immediate. I love that. I think it's really incredible. As you are still a Jewish student yourself, pursuing your doctorate in Jewish education, are you seeing these topics arise as you study the kind of like pedagogy of Jewish education?
You mean the topic like of body image or?
Yeah, I'm curious.
I haven't specifically seen body image come up as much, but in my research, so my doctorate focuses on high school students, current Generation Zers, who completed congregational B'nai Mitzvah programs, but who have not continued with their formal Jewish education or engagement. And I interviewed them to understand how they view their Jewish identities and what, if any, value add they see Judaism as bringing to their lives. And I was fascinated by so many of the takeaways from this research. But I think a huge part of it was, again, going back to that concept of being intersectional, that all of them expressed that they are proud to be Jewish. The vast majority saw it as something that's a value add. But the language that they were using to express how they felt about their Judaism really comes from a whole person stance. So they didn't necessarily talk about their bodies, but they spoke about their beliefs or their passions or how it relates to them as athletes or their aspirations as leaders, as social justice warriors, all the different things that they want to do in their lives and that they are already doing. They see Judaism as a part of this greater story of who they are. They don't want it to necessarily be separate, like this is my Jewish time and this is my everything else, which is also what I think many of us want for them, is that they see Judaism somehow as integrated into their overall lives and senses of self. So while body image didn't necessarily come up in those conversations, that's obviously a factor in how everyone exists in the world, and hopefully their holistic understandings of Judaism fall into play there as well.
Right. How has that research impacted the way that you approach this job with the Jewish Education Center of Cleveland? Like, is that impacting your programming as you continue to study?
Absolutely. So my research is actually going to be defended later this month and hopefully published soon thereafter. And so on a personal level with my own teaching, it's really shown me, I'd say, kind of what the aspirational goals are and what the practical realities are. I think, one of the issues that came up that any Jewish professional would nod their heads to when the teens were asked why they opted out, so much of it was about time and just that they didn't have enough time to keep going to religious school. So we could take that kind of as is, but we could also say, okay, Jewish teens and teens in general are doing a million different things. The things that they want to be prioritizing, they find a way, whether it's their sports teams or the leadership work that's going to show up on their college resumes or their AP classes or SAT prep or driver's ed. We know that they find time for the things that they want to find time for. So it's kind of flipping this question to say, on the surface, they really believe that they don't have time for this. But how do we become compelling? How do we become enough of a value add that they want to prioritize what's being offered from the Jewish community? Does it mean shifting the structure of our offerings? Does it mean pivoting in terms of the content? I think a lot of it is, rather than seeing ourselves as being in competition with the rest of somebody's life, thinking about, we have this amazing multifaceted faith tradition that can be applied to anything. I mean, I'm putting together a class right now that we're going to be doing on Judaism and self-care. We're doing a course on who are we responsible for, and thinking about both leadership and social action. So how do we take Jewish values and Jewish concepts and put them into a context that our teens will want to prioritize? I think is a huge step to take, rather than just saying, my mission is to teach X, and if whether or not that's what works for them, we just need to figure out a way to get them to care about X. There are so many things that I wish everyone cared about that my specifically Jewish nerdy self would love to delve into. But I think especially when we talk about meeting learners where they are, we need to walk that talk. It needs to be physically where they are. And if they're saying, you know what, I can't commit to every single Tuesday from 6 to 8. Okay, so what can they commit to? Is it one-on-one learning? Is it asynchronous options? Is it once a month? Is it saying we're going to have 1 month that's super intense on a topic for the month of September, but then October, we're not doing that because we know you're doing something else, but we're back in November for another 3-week series. So it's time-wise meeting them where they are. And then also, again, in terms of content, figuring out what is exciting, what's compelling, what's going to be comfortable enough to get them in the door, but challenging enough to keep them coming. I think that a lot of the time, we as the Jewish community, we see things that are exciting in other aspects of somebody's life, and then we think to ourselves, okay, how can I make this Jewish? How can I put a Jewish twist onto yoga, for example? And there are people who are doing amazing things with Jewish yoga. I am so not one of them. I am physically probably the least flexible person out there. But I think that the Jewish is what makes us different. It's what makes us unique and compelling. For a high school student, they don't need to, or a millennial or anyone, they don't necessarily need to be doing yoga in a Jewish space. If it's just yoga, they could go to places that specialize in that and are doing an amazing job with it. It's when we actively integrate what makes this different, what makes this valuable, what makes what you're getting from this community fundamentally different than you'd be getting anywhere else, that I think keeps people coming back and makes them want to spend time in these spaces.
Yes. Wow. All of that is incredible. Very well. I can tell how much time and true investment you have put into creating these spaces for these students to become great Jewish citizens of the world, maybe future Jewish leaders like yourself. So thank you.
Thank you.
Before we wrap up, I have one final question for you, which is, as we exist in this period of social distancing amidst the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic, what are you most looking forward to doing when this has passed and we begin to return to our normal lives?
Oh my gosh, I feel like my list changes every day. I am so excited to get a haircut and to get my husband's haircut. I think there's a lot of just curly hair happening right now. But on a serious level, I am so excited to see the members of my community again, to be able to see my parents, my students, my siblings. And I'm excited for the world that I hope we're going to reemerge into. I think so many people in this time, in this crazy, kind of disconnected, socially distant time, have stepped up, and I've seen members of my community rise to every challenge. I supervise our community's Shinshinim, which are Israeli students who are in the States for a gap year between high school and the army. And when we all had to be quarantined, we set up a meal train. And for 4 straight weeks, every single night, somebody in our community either brought them a home-cooked meal or ordered in a meal for them or did a grocery run and just took care of them. And we see that happening all over the place with people volunteering to do grocery shopping for elderly relatives or starting fundraisers for people who are out of work or industries that are being particularly hard hit, or everyone who's in these like amazing YouTube videos of everyone just cheering for healthcare workers. I live in like a super suburb where there's just not enough people around to do any kind of cheering videos, so I get to watch others. But to see how this spirit of we're all in this together continues, and to, keep eating locally and shopping small and prioritizing being part of a community and really just to connect with other people again. And I don't know if we'll be, I'm like brain dumping all of my wants onto you right now. I don't know if we'll be allowed to do this when we're allowed back out. I'm just really excited to hug people. I'm sure that's going to become like a new, really awkward taboo and people won't want to do that yet. But I am a hugger and I just really look forward to hugging people.
Me too. Well, Samantha, thank you so much for being here today. How can people keep up with you or the work that you're doing? Do you have a website or social media handles that people should go follow?
Anyone who is interested in following all my thoughts on Jewish education and seeing the dissertation when it's done can go to Samantha Vinokor-Meinrath. That's VINOKORMEINRATH.com. You can also follow me on Instagram. Right now I'm doing a daily Counting the Omer photo. So at Sam_Vinokor. And to learn about the work of the Jewish Education Center, we are at jecc.org.
Awesome. We'll put links to all that in the show notes. So once again, Samantha, thank you so much for being here, for all the work that you do as a Jewish leader in the Jewish community nationally and here in Cleveland.
Thank you so much for having me.
Leaderfolk is all about elevating voices and starting conversations. So now we'd love to hear from you. Email us at podcast@tcjewfolk.com to share your thoughts, your ideas, or to nominate future guests. Leaderfolk is a project of Jewfolk Inc. and the Jewfolk Podcast Network. For more information, visit tcjewfolk.com/podcast.